Swamp Thing has been one of my all-time favorite characters since I started reading all these different comic books, and anytime he appears in a book that isn't strictly a Swamp Thing labeled book, I feel like he's never quite done justice. When I first read the Alan Moore Volume 1 version of him, it was something absolutely magical, something beautiful, something that showed me a man and yet a creature with so much to give, and a scientific story that I've never really thought or seen anywhere else. I've recently been reading the DC Deceased comic books where the anti-life equation happens to strike the entire planet and turn everybody into zombies, and while it is very good, Swamp Thing eventually shows his pretty green face in the ending of that, and once again, I just thought, you know, this isn't exactly the Swamp Thing that I've known, the one written by Alan Moore, the creature from the green that just wants to do right by everybody, and mostly for the plants surrounding his own body. And since that first Swamp Thing video that I did, I believe it is called The Insanely Epic Story of Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, and if you haven't seen that, go check it out. It involves Swamp Thing dealing with a Floronic man, as well as him finding out that he's not even Alec Holland, the man that he always thought he was. He's actually just a tendril of plants and things alike. But when I did that video, I happened to leave out an entire chunk by the end of it. The video was already getting extremely long, and I figured I'd save it for later. Now, I've been trying to finish that video. I've been trying to come to the ending of it because it is so amazing. It is something that introduces Jason Blood along with Etrigan, as well as some other serious character arcs for Abby and Matt, and it's just been a story that I've been kind of afraid to do. I keep feeling like I'm not going to do the story any justice, and I think it is finally time that I just dig my claws into it and just try my best. This is one of the better Swamp Thing stories that I've read. It brings a lot of horror into the mix, with Abby just kind of trying to find a new job, Swamp Thing trying to come to terms with who he is, as well as Jason Blood just kind of going around the city telling everybody how they're about to die. It's a very interesting story. It's one that I thought was extremely fun, and on top of all this, we are dealing with a demon that has stricken a class of autistic kids that Abby has decided to start to work with. And in this story, there is a lot going on. We see Matt being taken over by a different creature, becoming the Raven that I didn't even know was related to the Sandman. I didn't realize how connected these two things were. The thing I find most impressive is just how Alan Moore was able to tie everything together in this. From Jason Blood just going around everybody telling them about their own deaths, to Abby's new job, and Matt's visions just getting stronger and more potent by the day. It is truly something that I believe everybody should read. So this should be a longer video, so get something comfortable, get yourself a glass of coffee, get yourself some snacks, and let us all sit down and enjoy this amazing story from Alan Moore himself. And where this is all going to take place is with Jason Blood entering the town of Baton Rouge. He arrived at the Baton Rouge bus depot a little after 11 on a Monday morning. So anyway, mister, it's been a great pleasure talking to you. And listen, if you ever need any loft insulation, Harry Price is my name, and this is my card. I'm sorry, Mr. Price. This card won't be any use to me. Hey, now look, you never know. I know that 12 years ago you crashed your car while drunk. You walked away unhurt. Your wife's been confirmed to a wheelchair ever since. Currently, you have 5 different girlfriends. You do not bother to conceal them from your wife, although you know how much pain this causes her. Hey, what? I never told you that. And at 5:32 this evening, you will be impaled by a swordfish. There is nothing to be done. It is written. Selena has already decided not to buy the lawn furniture. So you see, your card won't be any use to me at all. Good day. And just from this first page, we're getting such an ominous presence from Jason Blood himself. He's talking about this swordfish and how it's going to impale this guy, and it actually has nothing to do with him. He leaves this guy basically just sweating on the street. This thing that he says, an event that will happen to him, this Selena and this epic swordfish is nowhere near this man, and actually will explain later how the swordfish comes into contact and what this actually does to the other people's life, Selena and her husband. And upon first reading this, I had absolutely no idea who Jason was. I had no idea that he held Etrigan inside of him, and it made for a very confusing read. But now after reading a couple Etrigan comics themselves, as well as seeing Jason Blood in a few of the animated movies, this all is starting to make a little more sense. So hopefully some of you already have some prior comic book knowledge, at least in the DC universe and things like that. It will help you a great deal. But the next place that we're going to be headed to is a pawn shop, where Jason Blood will inevitably look for a Ouija board that will also tie into the later future of the story. He walks into the store, and we are greeted to a man that looks very oddly like Jesus Christ himself sitting behind the counter. And what he does is just ask him if he sells any more of these. He's holding up this Ouija board. Nah, at the moment I'm doing a lot of aura goggles, but a Ouija boards. I think I sold one 6 months ago. You want one? No. No, I don't think so. Ah, but this is Goya, isn't it? And we see Jason Blood looking at this painting, and he actually tells the shopkeep that he's met the man who made this forever ago, and then he never actually got to see the finished work of this whole ordeal, and he inevitably decides to buy it. The shopkeeper is kind of weirded out about this, but Jason does not care. He leaves, and it shows him walking outside. He sees a priest on the street corner. At 11:38, he gave $13 to a priest collecting for the mission fund, and then laughed for a full minute straight. The hotel was not the best, but it was the most atmospheric. The devil checked in at noon. And with this awesome introduction of Jason Blood, we kind of get an idea that this man knows something, that he can potentially see into the lives, or therefore the ending of these people's lives, and is kind of using this to toy with them. He knows that altogether, all these different moments eventually are going to collide, and I just thought this was amazing when I first read this. I thought that Jason Blood came off as a very interesting character, somebody that I definitely wanted to read more about, but as I've come across, I've read a few Etrigan comic books, and I'm not exactly trying to search them out. I think Etrigan is kind of cool, but with all the rhyming and things like that'll do that will come with later, it's just not quite my style. But I believe here, with Alan Moore's version of him, he has done such justice. And as we turn the page, we are greeted to our beloved Swamp Thing once again. We see him underneath the water, and we see a foot come down from above, and it's Abigail. We see Swamp Thing grab it, and as she is screaming, Swamp Thing finally lets go. We see Abby rise out, and she's wringing out her hair, and she just kind of tells Swamp Thing that she's sick of playing the creature from the Black Lagoon, and that maybe they could just play something else. I am sorry. Hey, I was just kidding. Actually, you know you were underwater for half an hour? You really don't need to breathe anymore, huh? I never did. It was only a habit. I gave it up. But how does it feel to just stop breathing? Strange. You realize just how much effort it has been all along. And as Abby and the Swamp Thing are just kind of walking over to this lovely grassy knoll, they both lay down, and we are greeted to a little bit more of a serious note, with Abby kind of explaining her home situation, but mostly Swamp Thing is just kind of sad that Matt has not come out to see him in a very, very long time. Abby, Matt didn't come to visit me again. No. Well, me and Matt, we aren't spending a lot of time together right now. It's mostly my fault. I've been a little highly strung. I sometimes imagine that, anyway, that's my problem. Maybe things will be better when I start my job. Job? Yeah, that was my big surprise. I had an interview yesterday at the Elysium Lawn Center for Autistic Children. A woman called Deanna French showed me around, and we see Abigail in the middle of this classroom. She's talking to this other teacher, and she's actually trying to introduce her to one of these different kids. Now, this kid's name is Paul, and he's a character that's going to be out through this entire book, and he's also the one that's going to be bringing our antagonist up to the front and center, a demon that has been plaguing everybody's dreams, and a pretty terrifying one at that. When it starts getting into the descriptions of what this creature is doing to all these different people, it's very real, and definitely not something that I would wish on anybody. But as Abby is meeting this kid Paul, she learns that this young boy has an insatiable fear of people spelling things wrong. And this is Paul. Are you going to say hello to Abigail, Paul? Abigail. Spell it. I'm sorry, what? Spell Abigail. Paul needs you to spell Abigail for him. It's spelled A-B-I-G-A-I-L. Is that okay? Abigail. Right. Paul doesn't really like you, Abigail. Because you're too witchy. I have to go now. I'm in a group. That was Paul. He's only been here for 3 months. If you want to come to my office, I can show you some of his work. It's very interesting. And as Abigail and Deanna go back to her classroom to check out Paul's artwork, we are greeted to a slew of these children's drawings, where they feature just a young boy who eventually spells this word wrong. And it shows this white monkey kind of tearing off his arms, tearing off his head, and it is some very demonic stuff. In my spelling group, Jesus started spelling something out wrong, and Paul bit him so he would stop. He is lucky. If I had not done it, he would have been murdered too. Deanna kind of goes on to tell Abigail that Paul's been here for the past 3 months, and the reason why is that his parents were killed in a freak wiring accident. But she asks Abigail what she thinks of Paul, and if she thinks that she could handle this job for a long period of time. Abigail just kind of goes on to say that it was fine, but that Paul was a very intense character. And Deanna looks at her very sternly and says, the first day I started this job, I wanted to quit within the first day, but that was 8 years ago. She continues to stare Abigail right in her eyes, and she says, Abigail, do you really want this job? And Abigail inevitably just says yes. And with the artwork going on, we see Abigail's face really up close and personal, and it's a little bit creepy looking. But for the most part, Abigail is very excited for this job. She realizes it's going to give her a little bit of security, it's going to get her mind off her own problems, and she she's just generally excited to help all these different kids. Anyway, listen, I have to drive down to Baton Rouge to buy some stuff that I need, and I told Matt that I'd be around for lunch. I better go. My hair can dry in the way. Take care of yourself. And is your skin changing color, sort of? Yes, the autumn is coming. And she laughs, unsure if she really is joking. She leaves. After she is gone, it stands and listens to the water, the trees, the insects. The autumn is coming. Autumn, and something else. Something dark. In the corner of his eye, a sudden blur of gray moving through the treetops up to the right. He turns, focusing. It's gone. He stands. He wonders, what comes with the autumn? Now, after seeing Abigail and Swamp Thing just kind of catching up, talking about their lives and what is about to go on with them, we are brought back to Jason Blood. He's here at this giant flea market, and in his hand is an Ouija board. This man comes up, and he just starts talking about if he's ever been to this place, if he's happened to see any lawn furniture, another crucial piece to the puzzle that we will come across later on. No, I'm sorry. It doesn't matter. Say, you know this stuff comes from some family that died? Man and his wife, both dead. Kids in a loony bin, I hear. Terrible business still. My wife's in there bidding for the lawn chairs. I tell ya, next summer I'm gonna be doing some real relaxing. Mr. Cornell. Next summer you'll be in jail for manslaughter. You see, Selena doesn't like the lawn chairs. Good day to you, sir. And as Jason is walking away, we see this man taking a puff off of his cigarette, and he has no idea how this mysterious stranger knows his wife's name. And cutting from this panel, we are back to Abby as well as Matt in their little hotel room. Matt is a little bit annoyed that Abigail hasn't necessarily been around. He starts telling her that she's been more focused on these kids she wants to work with than him himself. Abby doesn't necessarily want to hear this. This is kind of an ongoing arc from the first video that I did, and Abby inevitably just kind of tells him that she needs to go, that there's something that she needs to do. She leaves, and we see Matt just kind of walk over to the window, look outside, and he is just getting angrier and angrier. He looks down at the floor, at the clothes that Abigail has just changed out of, and he says, stand up. And the clothes rise from the floor, and they just kind of start floating there, right in front of Matt. Now get down on your knees and apologize. Something rustles as if it clambers down the drapes. Matt Cable is happy in a very personal heaven. This is kind of something from the first couple arcs that I did, where we kind of get to see a very demonic-esque artwork around this man, as well as Matt just sort of losing his mind to this different kind of power that he's recently come across. But as we leave that page, we are cutting back to Paul, and we are actually going to see the origin story of this child, how his parents actually died, and what has been haunting him this entire time, the thing that is compelling him to spell everything right, as well as the Ouija board that Jason Blood has just recently acquired. Is he asleep? Who cares? We aren't doing anything. Well, I guess not. Hey, do you like the board? I got it at the third eye. What do I have to do? Well, you put your fingertips on it like this. It jumped, Chris! Relax, it's supposed to do this. Chris, it's spelling something. Oh god, what if it's my Aunt Sophie? And as Paul's parents are just kind of having a good time with each other, they're just playing around with this Ouija board, and it begins to spell something. And what it is spelling is an incantation that is going to bring a demon up from hell. Oh Mox. Is that Hodel? Is it trying to spell Chimera? What's that smell? Oh yeah, geez, that is gross. Is that the refrigerator? I don't know. Say, is it coming from under the table? And as the two parents are smelling this terrible oddity, they look underneath the table, and we are greeted to the Monkey King himself. This terrible white creature with all this weird fur and tendrils around him. We see it actually consuming both of their heads, and as they're both just screaming, we cut to Paul up in his room, just kind of listening to everything that's going on. He can hear all these different wet noises, which is actually the crunching of this monster down on his parents. He hears the blood spill, and he just lays there in his bed, not knowing exactly what to do. The screaming, the sound exactly like somebody eating lettuce, the silence that followed, and then the footsteps, and the light at his bedroom door swung open. But that was not the most awful thing. It was the way it nuzzled against him. It was the way that the fur on its snout was sticky when it kissed his hand. That was the most awful thing. And I gotta say, Alan Moore's way of describing what is going on to this child's parents, with comparing the crunching of their flesh and their bones to wet lettuce, to talking about how this monster kind of slowly crept in the room, and that the most terrifying thing was to feel the blood on its muzzle. This is very descriptive writing that I absolutely loved the first time around, and I've probably read the story about 4 or 5 times, just trying to get myself comfortable with it, and it's something that just never gets old. Alan Moore is such a classic writer, and every time he just manages to be one of the best comic authors that I've come across yet. But after seeing this horrifying event with Paul's parents, we are cutting back to the flea market, and what do we see? The man who was asking Jason Blood about the lawn furniture standing beside his wife next to their car, and we are greeted to this giant swordfish strapped to the roof. Selena, that is the most awful thing I've ever seen. Where are we gonna put it? Bobby, shut up and tie to the roof. Selena, I don't don't even know if it's legal driving with this stuff on the roof. Why the hell didn't you buy the lawn chairs? Because I didn't like the lawn chairs. And it's my money, and now shut up. Oh, right, sure. I suppose that's what you told your psycho boyfriend. I didn't meet anybody at the auction. I wish to God I had. Believe me. Now get in the car, Bobby, and drive. And as these two just keep on continuing to fight, the man keeps going on about how he knows that his wife met this man, how he talked about her, how he knew her name, and she just continues to deny it. We see them driving down the road with a swordfish on the roof, and behind them is a biker sitting in the bike lane, followed by a very heavy atmosphere of foreshadowing. And in the wake of this foreshadowing, we are coming back to Swamp Thing. He is sitting there reconciling with himself in the swamp, just trying to figure out what exactly feels so wrong. This entire day has felt an enormous gloom around him. He notices that the birds have stayed silent all day, that the gators have stayed close to the bank, not really hungry for anything. He sits down and Swamp Thing begins to dream. A man in a furnace, Alec Holland. He can hear the roar of the explosion, hear the dreadful sizzling and bubbling and popping. He is propelled, a blazing stringless puppet stumbling through the flames, like some Catholic martyr, and he screams, and falls, and wakes, and thinks, what is it that comes with autumn? And knows, it is fear. It is fear that comes with the autumn. And after seeing Swamp Thing just going about his dreaming, we are cutting back to Jason Blood. He is now messing around with this Ouija board, and inside of the Ouija board, he is seeing exactly what has happened to Paul. He sees a man and his wife just kind of playing around, and inside of this, they have summoned a chimera, and he sees Paul trembling in his own bed. He sees Paul in utter fear as he's listening to his parents die and being eaten by this creature, and he knows that there is much to be done. He grabs his coat and he heads out for the town. And with these next couple of pages, we are about to see all these different coincidences that Jason Blood has been telling everybody. We are about to see them all collide into an epic prophecy laid true. We see Abby sitting in the streets, and once again, we are greeted to the man who is trying to sell all this loft insulation. He actually bumps into Abigail and makes her drop all of her things. He helps him pick them up, and he starts to make a little bit of small talk with her. Listen, my name is Henry Price. I'm down here for the loft insulation convention. Maybe both of us could use a little company in a strange town. No thanks, I have to go. Hey, don't run off. Listen, I know you must be wary of strangers. I mean, the people around here. Weird, forget it. I met this guy this morning at the depot, and listen, get lost, okay? Well, if that's really how you feel, look, I've got an idea that you might be somebody who could really use loft insulation. I got my card right here. And as this man is pulling this card out of his jacket pocket, we are greeted to Selena and her husband just kind of screaming. They see this man in front of them, and they slam on the brakes. And the futures of all these people are intertwined for once, laid in stone, and we are seeing the swordfish just kind of rush off the top of the roof, and it ends up stabbing the loft insulation man. Now, one would say this is a good thing. This man is kind of an annoyance. He's constantly trying to sell these people loft insulation, which is really, you know, how many people are actually going to use this? I mean, the man tried to use it as a pickup line, for God's sakes. But inevitably, this man is killed by the swordfish. Everything has been laid bare, and this man didn't have the chance to see it coming. Will you look at that? What a crazy accident. Selena, this is your fault. If we would have just gotten the lawn chairs. Now, you say you had this thing tied under your roof? Oh, Bobby, you jerk. You jerk. And with all this chaos ensuing around Abigail, she realizes that she just needs to get on with her day. She's sick of all these different things coming around and just bringing utter havoc to her life, and she just kind of pushes through the crowd. And as she does this, somebody begins to walk behind her, and it's Jason Blood himself. And right off the bat, he says her name to her. He says, Mrs. Cabal, may I walk with you? I have something to tell you. And this is kind of where Abigail snaps. She's so sick of all these different entities coming into her life, basically ruining every good little thing that she could possibly have, and she says, who the hell do you think you are? And this being one of the more funny moments of the book, with Jason Blood just kind of enveloping his own name and his actual origin and where he may actually be from. He says, who the hell indeed? And with a giant evil laugh, he just says, Jason Blood. And from here, finally, everything is made connected, from the Ouija board that Paul's parents used, coming to the hands of Jason Blood himself, with a swordfish strapped carelessly up on top of the roof, to the man who sells loft insulation being impaled by it, utterly penetrated, and the driver being sent to prison. And this is one of the moments where I realized what an awesome writer Alan Moore is. He managed to take all these three different scenarios from completely different people and found a way to take their stories all through a bunch of different arcs and actually make them all tied together into one everlasting prophecy, if you will. And it's why Alan Moore remains to be one of the best comic book authors that I've ever come across, and a character for sure. But after all this, we are cutting back to Paul in the present day at the school for autistic children, just just kind of sitting in his bed, and he's kind of remembering all these different things that happened to his parents. The blood on its muzzle, blood on his hands where it kissed him. He had laid awake all night, unmoving, its sickly breath warm upon his neck. In the morning, the Monkey King had gone. The neighbors called and found the bodies of his parents, then the police called and found him. They took him to the police station, but he couldn't tell them anything. They took him to the hospital, but they couldn't do anything. Finally, they brought him to Elysium Lawns, and they couldn't do anything either. They didn't believe him when he told them about the Monkey King. They thought he was crazy, but he wasn't. And we are seeing the demon that slew his parents once again, sitting before him at the tip of his bed. It's licking his cheek, and Paul knows that this thing just wants to be friends with him. For some reason, it has spared his life, and he just doesn't know how to proceed. He doesn't know how to do what the Monkey King wants him to do. And because of this demon just kind of roams around the school and does whatever it wants. It has no master currently. And this is where the story starts taking a very dark turn, as what this monster actually does is draw off the fear of anybody around it, siphoning all these toxins for itself and making itself stronger, transmuting its own shape into the actual things that all these people are so afraid of. And when I first read this, I thought, this is just really hardcore. The little girl in the next room is called Roberta. At the age of 4, Roberta accidentally smothered her infant brother with a polyurethane bag. That's why she's here. The taste of her fear is bright and coppery. It drinks both deeply and well. There are many children, but the night is long, and it is very hungry. Yes, for every child, rich or poor, there's a time of running through a dark place, and there's no word for a child's fear, and no ears to hear it if there was a word, and no one to understand it if they heard. God save the little children. They abide and they adore. And with the next couple pages, we are going to see Jason Blood and Abigail just kind of have a conversation. Abigail just kind of telling them that whenever she meets a character like him, it usually brings nothing but bad craziness. Bad craziness would seem to be a phenomenon that you are familiar with, but then you are an arcane. For you, it comes with the blood. Arcane's my maiden name. How? It isn't important. The bad craziness is almost upon you, Mrs. Cable. Only Elysium Lawns is important now. You start work there tomorrow. There's a child, and an orphan whose parents died recently of causes unknown. His name is Paul. You must make sure. How dare you! And once again, Abigail is snapping. She doesn't know how this man knows anything about her life, but she is so entirely sick of all these people just coming up to her and telling her about what is about to happen with her. She just wants one corner of her life that is left a surprise, and she tells Jason that abusing all these children as a scare tactic towards her is just the rudest thing you could possibly do. She goes on about how every time something good happens to her, somebody else comes along to ruin it. And when Abby kind of opens up about this to Jason, he just does not care whatsoever. He knows what's about to ensue, and he knows that none of her feelings are important right now, that only the children at Elysium Lawns are what needs to be focused on. Your self-pity interests me not even slightly. It is the children who are in danger. Watch over them, woman. Try to save as many as you can, for you know less than they of madness, and less than I of evil. Good day. And with Jason Blood's foreshadowing, Abigail goes running off into the swamps, trying to find Swamp Thing himself. Her chest hurts, her lungs are on fire, and she only wishes that some kind of tree would fall down, something that would put a pause to her life and just make it so she can't do anything about any of this. Her fear is overtaking her, and as soon as she makes it to Swamp Thing, he already knows what's wrong. He's felt this for a long time coming. Something in the air, something in the autumn, something darker. We're almost there at the heart of it. I could feel it in the air, dry, pickly, a leaden pressure on the eardrums, a fat dark worm that rises in your gut. Fear. I used to think I knew from fear. I didn't. All I knew were the suburbs of fear. And now here I am, in the big city. I was nervous when I started here this morning. I just stood outside, and I couldn't go in. In the end, I said enough. You're being stupid. Just open the door, and walk right on through. Everything will be okay. And as Swamp Thing and Abigail actually make it back to Elysium Lawn, they head through the back door, and as soon as she opens it, one of these troubled children is actually purely naked, and he immediately attacks her, throwing his fist in her face and just trying to altogether knock her down. Suddenly all the attendants come around and they're tackling this kid down to the ground, and they end up just kind of rolling him down in a bed just to make sure he doesn't hurt himself. Help me sit on this thing, will ya? Here, let me. You're Abby, right? Yeah, you're Tim Carpenter. I knew it was you. Deanna told me about the hair. Who was that guy? Oh, that's Vince. He'll be okay now that he's in the mat. Maybe thrash around for an hour or two, but he won't damage himself. They're all cutting loose this morning. You sure picked a terrific day to start work. And as Abby is kind of admiring her new job, she ends up walking into Deanna's office and she overhears her talking about how there's no more mats at all. And that every single kid in the school, for some reason, is utterly terrified. They're in complete revolt and they're just going absolutely wild. And there's hardly anything that any of the attendants can do about this. They realize that they just need to start taking all the beds and trying to roll up these children, which is a very odd method, but I understand that they're just trying to keep all these kids from hurting themselves as they just kind of don't really know what they're doing at the moment. Abby sits down and Deanna kind of just starts going on about the same thing, about how everybody's going wild, and that something very strange is going on. And she asks her to look at something, and what this is a bunch of pictures that the kids have recently drawn. Every single one of them has just drawn the Monkey King, the weird creature, the demon that we've seen haunting over Paul. Well, now it seems that everybody around this facility has actually seen it, and Abby just doesn't really know what to do. But I thought there was only one kid obsessed with monkeys. You showed me his books at my interview. Paul, wasn't it? Eventually, Abigail does go on to go meet Paul and to figure out what exactly is going on, and if maybe this child knows anything about the other children. Paul, how's it going? You remember me, Abigail? Abigail. Hello, Abigail. You know you'll die pretty soon, right? It'll just scare you to death. Death. Whatever you're scared of, that's what it looks like. Spiders, I bet. Most girls are scared of spiders. Spiders. Roberta said it looked like your kid brother, only he was all blue. Paul, who are you talking about? You know, the Monkey King. Paul's talking about the Monkey King, but nobody believes him. And what Abigail realizes is that the Monkey King is real, and that she has come across such other weirder oddities in her life, that with the whole situation with the Floronic man literally making all the plants ignite 10 times the amount of oxygen in an attempt to explode the world and return it back to its plant-like origins, that this just isn't that far off, and that there's no reason to actually not believe this child. Abby runs home to Matt, and when she actually tells him about this, Matt is furious. He just wants her to stay home. He keeps telling her that the only thing she's been preoccupied with is all these kids, and that he actually needs attention too. And with Matt just kind of throwing this giant hissy fit, Abigail has had completely enough. They're kids! Don't you dare call it a madhouse. One of them bit you on the leg, Abby. One of them swore at you and almost ripped your hair out. They throw up their food. They don't keep themselves clean. They're kids, Matt. They need somebody. And what if I need somebody tonight? And as Matt says this, he looks at Abby's face and he can tell that this was utterly and completely the absolute wrong thing he could have said. Instead of helping her, he's made this entire situation about himself, and this is something he's been doing for a long time now. Abby puts on her coat and she just tells him that she's going out. She's going back to Elysian Lawn to help all these children, that she knows that something is crucially wrong. And as Matt is looking for forgiveness, he pulls out his keys and he says that he would just love to drive her there, that he's so sorry. But Abby wants none of this. She slams the door in his face and she walks on. On's the only person who has ever been able to help her. The only person that's ever been a sane anchor in her life. And while this might be confusing, as we've already seen her go and grab Swamp Thing, that was just kind of an intermediary, a little intuition of what was about to happen, and she runs to Alec Holland, or at least the man that used to be Alec Holland. I tried to tell him about Paul, about Jason Blood and the Monkey King, about the fear I could smell in the air. All that came out was the usual Abby babble, but it didn't matter. He already knew. He'd felt it too. Felt it in the soul and the wind. He'd seen it in the flight of the birds and in the eyes of the gators. He knew. I think he knew more than me about how bad things were. He made us run all the way there. That must mean it's not too late, mustn't it? He wouldn't make us run if we hadn't already been too late, would he? And as they approach Elysian Lawn, they realize that they are too late. They can both feel it in the air. They can both hear it in the silence of the dead of the night. And once again, we are cutting back to Paul as he's watching the Monkey King enter his room for one last time. It ate fear. It disgorged fear. It lived on fear. And it killed with fear. That's how I had killed his mom and dad. The doctor said it was drugs, drugs, or an accident, accident, but he knew. His mother had bitten through her own tongue. They've been playing with that stupid Ouija board, and then they spelled something wrong. That's how the Monkey King got into this place from the other place. But if it wanted to stay here, if I wanted to stay here, it needed a master. Its touch is dry, like old beetle husks. It takes his hand and pulls him gently from his bed, and then after that, they take a little walk. And once again, we are going to get to see the Monkey King just kind of play on all these different children's fear, and by far, it is one of the absolute most interesting parts of this whole book, as it is extremely descriptive, and what you might think of these kids being afraid of isn't really just monsters or a witch out in the woods. It's actually very real things that they heard their parents talking about, and things things that they just plainly don't understand. It stops at Roberta's room, and what Roberta is seeing is this small tiny figure, and she can hear it breathing, but its breathing sounds raspy, almost if it's coming through a plastic bag. And with the next kid we see, it's actually just dreaming about this word cancer. It sees it as this giant red ball with all these different tendrils and tentacles coming out of it. Cancer is just a word that he heard his parents talking about, and he never got the chance to actually fully understand what this thing is. And while it is something to be feared, I thought it was a very interesting idea and concept, and probably something very true with kids hearing things that they just, like I said, don't understand, and start to have these irrational fears. This is kind of how phobias begin, and all sorts of different problems in our own lives. And as Abigail is walking in, she is approached by this monster. It is the Monkey King using Roberta's fear. It turns into this giant baby-shaped creature, this giant monster that only she could see in her mind, now come to reality. It bursts through this door, and Abigail and Swamp Thing are greeted face to face with this thing. And as they are, it starts changing all these different forms. It starts looking like Matt, it starts looking like all these weird centipede creatures, and the way Alan Moore decides to describe this thing is pretty terrifying and a very good idea. Its voice is a slurred and mindless parody. Its features are slack and hardly formed. Whatever you're scared of, that's what it looks like. Its shape flows, a viscous nightmare of liquid flesh. Its voice speeds and slows and changes the children's scream. The monkeys scream. The noise is unbearable. Alec is shouting, trying to tell me something. Doesn't he realize we're too late? And there isn't any hope. Not a hope in hell. And this is where we make our first greeting with Etrigan, or Etrigan. I can't quite remember which one it is, so just don't blame me on that. But this was my very first encounter with this creature, and somebody that I didn't really know. I never knew that this guy was Jason Blood. The first time I read this, I hadn't really read any Etrigan comic books or anything like that, and I couldn't tell if he was Jason Blood himself, or if he was another version of Matt, with his visions just manifested into reality. But now, coming back here and seeing this, it all just kind of comes together and makes it such an even better story. And just remains to be one thing that I love about comic books is how many different ones all kind of tie together, and the more you read, the more you're gonna get out of them. The toys about the nursery are set, for idiot chaos is arranged at whim. He drools and ruins lives. His chin is wet and old or young. It matters not to him. The gracious lady and her root-choked beast have come to save the innocents from harm, to spare them from the monkey's dreadful feast. What noble souls they have, what faith, what charm. And see, the children's uproar brings to life their guardians, that most dedicated breed. Yet she betrays her husband, his wife, though both of them are kind to babes in need. Should innocence be mollycoddled thus, I fail to see a reason for fuss. I am the one who comes to chase the ape. Innocence, why to hear the tales they feel? You think there was no guilty child in hell? Feast, jackanape, eat hearty while you can. And we see Etrigan just rip the roof right off this building, and he is about ready to go to town on this creature. For he knows exactly what he is about to be dealing with. He's seen the horrors down below, and he remains to be the only person who could possibly come into hand when it comes to taking down a fellow demon. Upon your necks, the breath of Etrigan. And there we go, his name is Etrigan. It began with death. It began with blood. I guess it'll probably end the same way. And once again, we are cutting back to Matt out in the hotel room. He is just kind of drinking and thinking about how terribly he's just messed up with his wife. When the moment arose that he could actually help her, he denied her and just made everything about himself, comparing his own pleasures to the safety of children, and he knows that he needs to set all this right. Now, he's had a few drinks, but either way, he picks up his keys and he decides to go for a little drive. He buttons his coat and steps outside. He's going after her, going to help her, going out into the cold, the dark, the night. The night can make a man more brave, but not more sober. And as Matt is speeding down this road, trying to set things right with him and Abigail, he comes around this turn and he absolutely decimates his own car, as well as himself, almost completely. The terror of the audience turns to mine. Their screaming masks make not the slightest sound. A gourmet of despair. See here, the poor bewildered orphan boy, whose parents set the monkey devil free, perceiving magic at some parlor toy. Their lives were at forfeit, and his sanity. And here behold that of pestilent ape. Its grip upon his arm could not be faster. Its name is Fear. Like fear it alters shape, and yet it licks his hand and calls him master. As for these shrieking statues, I'll not weep. They'll perish as they lived, dazed, witless sheep, in slaughterhouses far beyond their ken. I shed no tear for those that die unshriven, for they are men. And what are men but chariots of wrath? and we see Etrigan slashing his claws through this monster. It's actually the cover of the issue, but all the artwork throughout this entire thing with all these horror-esque situations going on are very good. I'm a person that really enjoys a good horror story, and this is right where it's at. It has mystery while not being super predictable, and it doesn't really just go right in for the gore. It actually has a nice slow build-up, and that slowness actually pays off towards the end. Abigail sees all this, and she tells Swamp Thing that they need to get all these kids out of here, that they don't need to be around any of these creatures, Etrigan or the monster itself. She realizes that the Monkey King actually has Paul in his hand, and when Etrigan hears this, he jumps on top of it and he begins to just pull its face apart, ripping it into all sorts of different pieces, and inevitably makes it drop Paul's hand. Eventually the monster does overpower Etrigan, and it starts running towards Abigail and Paul, and Swamp Thing just delivers the biggest, mightiest Floronic punch he possibly can, and just kind of buys them all the time that they need. The swamp, Abby. Run for the swamp. But you, what about you? There are those two monsters, and as we see Swamp Thing just trying to tear this thing apart, as well as keeping Etrigan at bay, as he doesn't know exactly what this man's place in this whole ordeal is, he just tells him, there are 3 monsters here. Now run. And this is exactly what they do. And as Abby and Paul are running towards the swamp, we are cutting back to Matt sitting in his now flipped over car, a man laying in total disarray. This happens to be one of the more confusing parts of this book that I still don't completely understand. Off with the kids, I bet. Always off with the kids. It was me who needed you. It was... What, do you hear that? That buzzing? Is that a fly? I know we argued, but I was sorry. I came after you to help. A little drunk, curved too fast. Whose is all this blood, Abby? Oh God, our mother. I don't want to die. And as we get this terrible shot of Matt's face all mangled inside this utterly destroyed car, we see this strange yellow fly walk up, and it tells him that he doesn't need to die. He tells Matt that he knows that he's probably very alarming, and that if he needs to scream, just go ahead and do it. There's nobody around, and surely when he's done, he will still be here to proceed with this conversation. Now, I know that this book does a lot of jumping around, so just try not to get too confused. It's very cinematic if you really think about it. It's cutting between all these different people. And once again, we are cutting over to Paul and Abigail just running through the woods, running for their lives. And they are struggling. Paul is utterly terrified and he just doesn't want to move anymore. They slow down for a moment and Paul is just going on and on about the Monkey King. And with his little twitch of spelling things aloud, he tries to do this one more time. And this infuriates Abigail. And she says, look, Paul, I understand how to spell the Monkey King. We need to continue. We need to keep on running. We cannot slow down for anything right now. And as Paul begins to tear up, Abigail apologizes and she realizes that what she has done is pretty wrong. Oh look, Paul, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to shout. Paul, I'm scared too. And as she says this, they hear something from behind them, and it is Etrigan himself. And what he has realized to be the only way to stop this creature is basically to just eliminate Paul. Thus fear breeds anger, which in turn breeds fear. This cancer must be cured. My choice is clear. The ape is battling with a thing of moss. His small reluctant master quite forgot. Soon it will pause and realize its loss. Its howl will come too late, and matters not. By then the child that binds it to this plane shall be consumed. In hearing this, Abigail goes berserk. She tries to start punching Etrigan, and he just pushes her away and basically tells her that nothing will remain to this kid. That he is basically going to eat him alive in order to stop this creature from harming everybody else. He already said it once before, he will not even let youth come in between him and his mission, for essentially the greater good. Fear not, for pain is short and death is long, though as to what dreams follow, legends vary. They also suffer those that do not wrong. Your death is small, but it is necessary. And Swamp Thing comes in from nowhere and absolutely slams Etrigan into the ground. So, you escaped the Monkey King's festering clutch. Perhaps you had no fear for it to use. I'll own, it does not interest me much. You play dice with a demon, sir, and lose. And what Etrigan essentially does is he takes his claws and he chops Swamp Thing's arm off. And Swamp Thing just kind of looks around at his own body and he just picks his arm up and he essentially just places it back on his body. This man is not a man, he is a bunch of plants that are ever growing, and it kind of makes him almost essentially immortal at that point. We already seen from the first story him being shot up with all these different bullet holes, frozen, and it only took an unthawing for him to come back to life. And with his arm back in place, he punches Etrigan one more time. And from here, we're just seeing Abigail holding Paul in her arms, just running through this dark forest, telling him that everything's gonna be alright, that this green man may be a monster, but he is there for them. And as they stop underneath this tree, she starts to feel this wetness coming down from her face, a bunch of spittle. And when she looks up, it is none other than the Monkey King once again, coming for his master. Can't scream anymore. Good. And once again, we are left out on a cliffhanger. We are greeted back to Matt and this weird, strange fly that is just trying to kind of propose this idea. And if any of you know exactly what about just happened, I would greatly appreciate the feedback. Perhaps you'll listen to my proposal now, Mr. Cable. Or may I call you Matthew? Your body is quite smashed, I'm afraid. I fear that you will bleed to death within the hour, unless you prefer not to, in which case I may be able to help. Now, if you want to see your wife again, I'm afraid you'll have to do something rather unpleasant first. It's always the way with these kinds of things. It won't take long. And we see Matt look at this creature and just ask what he should do. Now, the artwork for Matt in his car, it is very dark and very gruesome. His jaw is basically completely shattered, and when he says this fly basically tells him to open his mouth. And when he does so, the fly ends up crawling inside, and he says this part will be worse. Cutting back to Abby and Paul out in the woods, this creature, the Monkey King himself, has now jumped down on top of Abigail. And when she looks at it, it resembles Matt himself, the person that has brought this lady so much grief and so much trouble in her personal life, as well as happiness. Paul screams, "Leave her alone!" as he realizes that fear itself is what is making this creature so big, what is making it so powerful. And he tells it, "I know you killed my mom and my dad, but I'm no longer afraid of you." And as he says this creature starts to shrink, and he's turning into all these different forms. He actually turns into his mom at one point, and he just starts saying, "Paul, please stop." "No, you're not my mom. My mom is DEAD. You're a scummy little monkey, and you don't scare me. You're a liar. No, you just pretend to be things. Well, you can pretend to be a snake or a wolf or a monster, and I don't care. You're not frightening me anymore. Little kittens are scarier than you. Not as scary as a mouse. Not even as scary as a bug." And this is a part that reminds me a ton of It, when the kids are just screaming insults at the clown himself. Now, I don't know which one of these came out beforehand. I don't want to pause this video to go check it out, but I thought that was just kind of interesting how similar these two stories kind of started to get towards the ending. But as Paul is screaming at this monster, and he tells it that it is nothing more than a bug, it's shrinking smaller and smaller until it literally is a bug in his hand. And we just see Etrigan come over, pluck it out, and what he does is he stares at it. He opens his mouth wide, and he just drops it in, alright? He just eats this thing whole. A demon consuming another demon. Is it cannibalism? I don't know. Don't worry about that right now. Fear, no matter how small it has grown, retains a certain flavor of its own. The ape is caged. It seems where demons fail and monsters falter, angels may prevail. You have my thanks. One warning I'll afford. Your parents freed the monkey with a charm. Letters on a board. Was there some further fiend that nudged their arm? The answer, madam, is for you to know. I've said too much, and my job is done. I go. And as Etrigan just disappears into the woods, Abby screams. She needs to know what exactly this creature means. She needs to know why it is being so vague, basically. That is one thing that drives me utterly insane about Etrigan, is he's a rhyming demon. He talks in rhymes. He reminds me of the bee guy from Naruto, somebody that also drove me utterly insane. But I gotta say, Etrigan, not quite so as much, as he's not so ridiculous with it. But eventually Swamp Thing finally comes, he's done with his fight, and he approaches Abby. "Alec, he was talking to me. I've got to know what he meant. Can you take Paul back to the Elysium Lawns? Please, Alec, this is something important. I can feel it. I gotta know, Alec." And Swamp Thing grabs Paul's hand, and he just asks him if he's scared. They both look at each other in the eyes underneath the moonlight, and Paul basically just says, "No, not anymore. I just want to go home." "Were you scared when the Monkey King jumped on you? What did you see?" "I saw fire. Once. I knew somebody who died by fire." "And you were afraid?" "Yes. A little." "That's good. I mean, you know, it makes me feel better. I mean, if even monsters get scared sometimes, then it isn't so bad, is it?" "No. It isn't so bad." And this heart-touching little moment between Paul and Swamp Thing is what made this whole story for me, you know. I thought it was just such a beautiful moment, that this child overcoming everything, and Swamp Thing just kind of finally reconciling himself with his own death, and the person that he may or may not be. It's just one of the things I love about Swamp Thing, is his kind of existential crises throughout all these different stories, just trying to figure out what he is, and who exactly he is, or who he used to be, and it remains just to be such a huge touch of humanity throughout all these different books. But with this beautiful moment that Swamp Thing and Paul have just had, we are going back to Abby, and she's just still running through the woods, trying to find Etrigan, trying to figure out what this man has to say, and what exactly he knows. She keeps wandering out towards this field, and eventually she sees a man sitting there, and it is none other than Jason Blood. Miss Cable, you must forgive me. I am indisposed. You and that demon, you're the same person." "Yes, I suppose we are. It hasn't always been this way. Once we were very very different. Our psyche's constantly at war. We struck a bargain, a spiritual compromise. We would grow more like each other. But a bargain with a demon is no bargain at all. Demons cheat. It is their nature. Oh yes, I've grown more like Etrigan. He too has grown more like Etrigan. He has merely borrowed a little of my intellect. It has not changed. We are still at war, and I fear that I am losing. And Abby, not really understanding what this man means, she just keeps telling Jason that Etrigan had given her a warning, and that she needs to know what exactly it is, and if she should just take this all in stride or actually believe it. A warning. I cannot help you, Miss Cable. Etrigan knows things that I do not. If he warned you, you'd best stay on your guard. Sometimes a demon may offer words of wisdom, and sometimes they even tell the truth. And when I first read this whole thing, not exactly knowing who Jason Blood is and his relation to Etrigan himself, I was extremely confused, as Jason Blood and Matt have a very similar look in this book, but now I'm seeing all this is just kind of moot, because now I do know, and I've explained it a lot throughout this video. But that was just my first experience, so hopefully I've done a good job at kind of explaining everything that's going on here. And with our last page, we just see Swamp Thing walking up with Paul to the Elysium lawn, and just kind of bringing him back home. Along its eastern edge, the sky's aflame. He skulks back to his mud, his ferns and stones. It is unease he feels without a name, or merely autumn gnawing at his bones. The things of shadow vanish within the night, worse horror still. And after Swamp Thing returns back to his own home, for our last scene, our last page, we see Abby walking towards the highway, and none other than Matt himself comes driving up in a fresh new car. No longer totaled, Matt's face and his jaw are back to normal, and it seems that something very wrong is going on here. But Abby has absolutely no idea. He opens the window and he just tells her that he just wants to apologize and that he wants to give her a ride. And Abby, just kind of forgetting everything that's happened, she's had an incredibly stressful night and she just kind of wants some normalcy. She opens the door and she gets in. Thus mollified she goes, harsh words forgiven, down highways in the dark, by demons driven. And that is the end of our story, and a very interesting one at that. I've still yet to get Swamp Thing Volume 2, so I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but rereading this with you guys is definitely giving me the urge to go and pick that book up. I know they have a giant set that holds all of these, but it is some $100 or so, so I don't know when I'll do that. I would like to have the whole collection at once, but either way, I think this story was probably the best out of this entire book. I do think the first video that I did that kind of explains how Alec Holland became the Swamp Thing, as well as him learning exactly what he is with being kind of torn open by the Floronic Man and just figuring out that all of his organs and things were just more plant masses trying to form with the shape of humanity that Alec Holland always knew, as well as the Floronic Man trying to take over the world. It was all very good, but this one was just the topping on top of the cake. I think the sense of horror and the mystery with Jason Blood was all tied very well together. I've read a couple of different Etrigan comic books, and I gotta say, this is the best version of Jason Blood that I've seen throughout any of them. This is Alan Moore's writing, his ability to tie all these different arcs together in a very fascinating way, with the swordfish, with the Ouija board, with Paul's parents. I thought it was just totally awesome, and by the end of my first reading of this, I was utterly blown away, and it made me want to pick up a lot more of Alan Moore. The man has so many different writings, one that I've already read, which is Watchmen, which is a very good movie adaptation, but still the graphic novel kind of holds to be the better more of it, no pun intended with bad grammar involved. And with this giant video, I'm now seeing that we are reaching almost 2 hours of video that I'm going to have to edit. This is kind of my attempt to start branching out into some of these more big giants. I'm extremely intimidated when I record these things because I know how long it's going to take. And sometimes I just kind of lose track like halfway through and it just kind of ends in a lot of lost time. So yes, hopefully this will be posted soon. I'm sure I'll come out with a few shorter videos in between the editing of this thing just to make sure there's not too many gaps in content. And I just want to thank you all so much for sticking around the channel, commenting and everything, and just being so supportive. So when you see giant gaps in time, just know that I'm either very busy or I'm working on a very big video, one of the two, because I really try to stay hammered onto this channel, trying to constantly punch out one video a week, or one video every week and a half if it's something bigger. And so yes, I just want to say how much I appreciate you guys, and also I'm running out of these smaller stories to do, these ones that end up being like anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes, and we're just gonna have to start weaseling our way into these giant ones, because because that's where the big interesting things come along. I've just finished the whole DC series. It was very good. Like I said early on in the video, there's some parts, there's so many characters going on that nobody really ever gets some serious like character development time, and that's kind of the only flaw I'd have to say. But when it comes to things like Nameless, George Orwell's 1984, The Last Ronin, all these like 300, 400 pagers, they are extremely good. As well as some of these older Batman stories that I have from the 90s, such as Batman Birth of the Demon, Bride of the Demon, and Son of the Demon, which they all go together. It actually involves with the birthing of Damian Wayne. The first book actually recollects the journey of Ra's al Ghul and how he basically became an immortal being, as well as Batman, as he's actually dipped in one of the vats. As well as like Batman Holy Terror. I've actually got the Hellraiser Jihad volumes as well. There's just so many different things to go through. So go to my community posts. I actually posted my whole entire collection. Go through there and maybe comment on this video which one of these you would like to see next, or otherwise I'm just gonna pump out whatever I can manage to pump out. So yes, everybody, I hope you enjoyed that amazing story. I hope you are a little more in tune with Swamp Thing, Jason Blood, Etrigan, all these different factors, Matt becoming a Raven from the Sandman, which I never knew. Thank you ton, Jerry. And yeah, this has been a long ass recording. By far this will be my longest video ever. Hopefully it clocks in at about an hour, but I don't know if I can cut 50 minutes out of a 2-hour recording, so we will see. And thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed.